All right, going into the 2021 season, the Ole Miss Rebels are definitely going to be the most overlooked team in college football. I'm even part of that guilty party that kind of overlooks Ole Miss. Maybe it's because of their brand name, maybe because they just don't have the most intriguing uniforms. I don't know, but Ole Miss is definitely going to be a very dangerous team going into the 2021 season. When you take a look at what Lane Kiffin did to that offense, I mean, Ole Miss has pretty much always had decent offenses, but Ole Miss kind of took that offense to a different level. Matt Corral has been the best quarterback they've had probably since Chad Kelly. You look at some of the skill position receivers that we've seen last year was extremely impressive. These are not guys that are 4 and 5 star players, but generally a lot of those skill position players consist of 2-star, 3-star players. Maybe you have some late 4-star prospects. But we saw a lot of their potential. We saw a lot of their upside being showcased last year, and against some of the best teams like in Alabama, like in LS, like powerhouses like Alabama, LSU, in Florida. I mean, it was generally impressive to kind of see. But this Ole Miss team was extremely dangerous, and for a team that went 5-5, a majority of the games they were in, they were very extremely competitive games. And you can make an argument this could have been at least a 7 or 8 win football team last year if it wasn't for some costly mistakes, and more specifically their defense kind of holding them back. This Ole Miss team was extremely good last year, and now going into the 2021 season, Ole Miss fans should have higher expectations. So looking at the 2021 season real quick, or just previewing real quick, let's talk about the skill position players. Now, yes, you lose Elijah Moore and Kenny Ebola, right? These are two players that were huge. Kenny Ebola, that athletic 6'4", 230-pound receiving tight end that you can put in the slot. That was a nightmare to guard in the slot. He wasn't a Kyle Pitts type of guy. He was actually kind of more of an Ingram, more of an Evan Ingram type of player, just a very, very fast, striding type of tight end, more of an O.J. Howard caliber player. But he was extremely effective, more specifically in the slot. Then you look at Elijah Moore, who was just dangerous on the outside. You can line him up in the slot, you can line him up out wide, and his route running ability, his release, and he was actually stronger than I would think a lot of cornerbacks or a lot of players or fans give him credit for, but he was a lot stronger pound for pound wise than, again, a lot of people kind of give him credit for. You kind of lose those two players, and those are very, very big players. Those are very, very big losses that the Ole Miss Rebels had to try to recover. But then you look at some of the other players that contributed last year to their passing attack. You look at guys like Mingo. Look at guys like Braylon Ingram. Look at guys like Dontario Drummond. These were 3 guys that that quietly were very, very effective players. I think the lowest person had less than maybe 300, think 300 or even less than that. But they were all pretty effective, pretty in the red zone as well. Again, Ole Miss, the way Lane Kiffin kind of constricts his scheme, or kind of constructs his theme, it's very friendly to the skill position players like the running back, the quarterback, and the receiving positions. So again, you can definitely get the most out of that at that particular position group, which is the receiving position. And those 3 guys were key contributors to the Ole Miss passing game, and now you bring 3 of those guys back. That's a big win for the Ole Miss Rebels, and who knows, maybe they can take the next step like a Kenny Ebola, like an Elijah Moore, and definitely be better than what they were last year. And again, Matt, with the way that Matt Corral is coming back and kind of how huge he was in the passing game, and then the fact that you add on to 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen, you return 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen. This passing attack with Lane Kiffin in year number 2 could be very, very dangerous with those 3 specific players. You also take a look at the running back position. That's a strength. I mean, Jerrion Ealy has been a complete monster the last couple of years. He's been a beast in the return game. He's been a beast in the receiving game, and most importantly, the ground game. And you're talking about a player that's a projected first round pick as a baseball player, a 2-sport athlete, and the way he's contributed over the last couple of years for the Ole Miss Rebels has been phenomenal. And I think that Jerrion Ealy would continue to improve. You also kind of bring back Parrish and Connor as well to add to that running back trio as well. And then if you add in the fact that Matt Corral had over 500 rushing yards last year, and they use a lot of RPOs, a lot of RPOs. They use a lot of read options, and then most importantly, when plays break down, we saw Matt Corral. He was able to extend plays not only just in the passing game but also in the run game as well. So again, with the threat of the backfield, including with Matt Corral in there, Ole Miss, top from bottom, when it comes to skill position players, it's one of the best groups in the country. And I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking the fact how Ole Miss put up numbers last year. And kind of like how I implemented a little bit before, you return 4 out of the 5 guys out of your offensive line, with only maybe one position, with maybe only one key guard position that you kind of have to fill in. Ole Miss is going to be dangerous on the offensive side of the ball. Now, will they be better than what they were last year? I'm not particularly sure because, again, Elijah Moore and Kenny Ebola were huge contributing factors to why Ole Miss was very, very successful. However, the way that Lane Kiffin and that offense pretty much made everyone better there, we could see Ole Miss's offense be just as effective as they were last year. So I'm not particularly worried about what they're going to be doing there. I think the biggest thing to worry about is their defense. Their defensive line was horrible. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Their defensive line was dog crap. Their secondary, I feel like, wasn't as bad as kind of what people made it out to be. I think a huge contributing factor was that they just couldn't really get after the quarterback. They just couldn't put pure pressure on the quarterback. I think their linebacking core, I think, is the same. They're not as bad as kind of what people make out to be. Their defensive line was horrible. So, but overall wise, defensively, this was not a good unit, and this was the obvious reason why the Ole Miss Rebels did not win a lot of games, was because of that defense. So that's something that they have to try to fix. That's something that they'll try to fix, because you look at some games, some notable games, like the Alabama game and the LSU game, but more specifically the Alabama game, where Ole Miss had over 600 yards of offense on that Alabama defense. Ole Miss's rushing game rushed close to 300 yards. Their passing game went over 300 yards. And really, Ole Miss was the first team to put an immense amount of pressure on Alabama for all 4 quarters. Really, it was only 2 teams that did it. Ole Miss and Florida were the only 2 teams that put pressure on them for all 4 quarters. And Ole Miss did it. And Ole Miss, again, Florida was down 35-17 at halftime. Ole Miss was only down by 1 score going into the 4th quarter. It was a track meet, but if the defense was just a little bit better and was able to make a couple of key stops on Alabama offense, Ole Miss is winning that game. And it's an upset. And, going into that game, Lane Kiffin, with all the trolling that he kind of did, saying, yeah, we're not quite ready yet. And then what they were able to see, Ole Miss's offense was ready. They were more physical than Alabama. Their receivers, including the tight end Kenny Ebola, was a problem to guard in the slot. Now, again, it was Alabama. It was week. It was kind of week, 2 or 3. So it was really early on in the season for this Alabama defense to kind of really fix their mistakes going later in the season. But Ole Miss had them, and they let them off the hook, kind of Coach Green, quote unquote, Coach Green there. But the Ole Miss Rebels going into 2021, that is, I'm telling you, the offensive side of the ball is going to be very, very good. The question is going to be their defense, because last year it held them back, and it held them for Ole Miss to winning way more games than what we probably would have expected them to have going into that season in the first place. But the 2021 season is going to be a little bit more difficult this year. I think some notable games to definitely circle is the Alabama game. You're going on the road to Tuscaloosa. I think you have a brutal 5-game stretch in that late October, November period when you're playing A&M, you're playing Auburn. So we got LSU, so we got to kind of consider that. The one notable game that I'm honestly looking forward to is the rematch with Hugh Freeze. That's the one game I'm looking forward to. Liberty is not going to be an easy game compared to a lot of what the other SEC teams will play around that November period when they're playing against an FES or low Division I type of school. Liberty is no joke, and again, Liberty, what we were able to see from Ole Miss is that they competed with a lot of Power 5 conference teams like the NC States, the Virginia Techs, and the Syracuses of the world, and even the Coastal Carolinas, which ended up being a borderline top 10 team, they ended up beating. So Liberty, the rematch between that is going to be a very interesting and fun game to see. But overall wise, I don't expect Ole Miss to be a juggernaut. I don't expect Ole Miss to win the SEC, but I do see them as a threat. They are a threat to the Alabamas of the world. They're a threat to the LSUs. They're a threat to the typical Power Five, the typical power, conferences. Those powerhouse, type of schools in the SEC. They are the biggest threat. I don't really see Arkansas being a threat. Vanderbilt, please. Mississippi State, no. Ole Miss is that legitimate threat to the Alabamas and the LSUs of the world. I think the question is that can they replicate what they did in 2020 going into the 2021 season? Because we have seen at times and we've seen, prime examples of teams that had the Alabamas of the world on the hook, and the next year they kind of revert back to being just a mediocre program. We'll see what the Ole Miss Rebels does for the 2021 season.